Roundup, the president is asking his cabinet members to slash their budgets amid criticism about the rising federal deficit ahead of the midterms. In a White House meeting Wednesday, President Trump asked his secretaries to trim their spending by 5%. He's dubbing the idea the nickel plan. The president can only request budget cuts, with Congress ultimately approving all proposals.
I would like you to come back with a 5% cut. Get rid of the fat, get rid of the waste, and I'm sure you can do it. I'm sure everybody at this table can do it.
The push comes one day after Senate Majority Leader Mitch McConnell called the federal deficit, quote, very disturbing. The Kentucky lawmaker dismissed criticism recent Republican tax cuts were to blame, instead saying federal spending programs were at fault. Ginger Gibson joins me now from Washington. She's a political correspondent for Reuters. All right, Ginger, these are fascinating times in our political landscape. Let's take a look at this particular slice. President Trump campaigned in 2016 partly on a platform of cuts and deregulation. Is the White House trying to go back to its old messaging with this proposal ahead of the midterms?
This is an effort by Republicans to tell their base that they haven't forgotten about all of those things they normally talk about on the campaign trail. We've seen a number of examples of this from Republicans. Mitch McConnell saying that the deficit was out of control, President Trump calling for budget cuts, and Leader McConnell telling Reuters today that he would revisit repealing Obamacare. All of this is a message to those middle-of-the-road voters, those finance issue voters, that they're not forgotten about those issues and that they promise if they stay in power in Congress, they'll come back to them.
Well, so this comes after a Treasury Department release said that the budget deficit for 2018 rose 17% from the previous year. So you say this is the message. Is this proposed budget cut, though, more about just political messaging, or does it actually have the potential to see tangible results?
Budgets are almost always about political messaging. When it comes down to the brass tacks of actually passing spending bills or writing the checks, Congress very rarely makes the cuts that they put in their budget, either in their own or in the president's. That's because it can be really difficult to do so. And they haven't shown any interest in sort of engaging in the process to allow that to happen. So it is easy to point to politics when you start hearing them talking about cuts right before the election, especially when you're talking about cuts that we don't see followed up in actual changes in the spending legislation. But that's not to say they couldn't do it. They have tried for years to change entitlement programs like Social Security and Medicare, and those would be things that would face potential changes should Republicans get reelected to control both chambers of Congress.
All right, Ginger, you talk about writing checks. Let's stick with that theme for a moment here. But on the private donor side, you reported the current fundraising totals for both sides of the aisle are on pace to break records this midterm election. What's been the driving force behind donations?
That's right. The members of the House and the candidates running for the House have raised over $1 billion in the last 2 years. And we see the Senate also on pace to break their records, the House record being $1.2 billion. In the House, it's a combination in both chambers that's driving these fundraising. Democrats are raising off of the anger directed at President Trump, and Republicans are raising off of happiness, particularly among their more business-minded base, about the tax cuts that they passed into law last year.
So, yeah, you have these large sums on both sides. As you just said, you have Democrats are collectively out fundraising Republicans. How big of an edge does that actually give to Democrats? And can the GOP close the gap with less than 3 weeks until Election Day?
We do see Democrats bringing in total more money than Republicans, especially when you look just at the candidates and not at their national parties. But there might not be much of a real advantage there. And that's because Democrats fielded so many more primary candidates who were also bringing in historic fundraising totals. And that may mean that while they have a little bit more money, it's not enough to really make a difference as we get closer to Election Day.
So the AP asked the president Tuesday if he bears any responsibility in the event that Republicans lose the House. His response was no. However, he has closely linked himself, of course, with Republican candidates across the country. So can he have it both ways, you think?
It's hard to imagine a midterm election that isn't directly tied to President Trump. Both Republican and Democratic candidates are trying to make this election a referendum on the president. Whether he wants to say it's because of him or not, it might not matter. Voters are telling us that their decisions in this midterm elections are about Donald Trump. He's more trying to paint it as where his efforts, where he's campaigning. He's traveling all over the country, arguing that the places he goes are places where he's helping them. But it's obvious he's not going to the places where he could be hurting or is hurting the Republican candidate on the ballot. It's very difficult to imagine that at the end of the day, much of this is not about President Trump.
Well, I wonder, Ginger, is there a premature blame game going around here by Republicans ahead of Election Day, or even perhaps a intentional lowering of expectations ahead of Election Day?
There is a little bit of lowering of expectations that we're seeing, particularly on the Republican side, where they're trying to downplay the potential that they would lose a chamber of the House or make it feel like it was inevitable so Democrats don't try to build off a momentum from having captured a chamber. But we are weeks still away from that election, although it might seem like it's just around the corner and some people have already started voting. There's a lot that can change in that time period. And so it may be a little early to start passing the blame game around, especially if some of those races that are really tight shift one way or another in the last couple of weeks.
So, of course, women voters are a key demographic in this election. You have the president recently calling Stormy Daniels, quote, horseface. He said, you can take it any way you want. Is the White House concerned at all about his comments ahead of November potentially affecting that female vote?
The White House is not concerned about his comments and how it would affect the female vote. And the Republican Party seems to be betting on the idea that the women who are angry at President Trump are already about as angry as they could possibly be, and they couldn't be made any angrier, that they're already at a 10 out of 10. That's a theory that's going to be tested. Comments like that are known to have upset women voters. The Kavanaugh confirmation has upset women voters. Whether or not it plays out on Election Day is still yet to be seen. But we know and we see in polls, and when I'm out on the campaign trail talking to voters, these women are telling us that they're angry and that they're mobilizing to try to get President Trump's party removed from power because of it. What will be seen is if the president can mobilize his voters to counter that.
Right. And there are women who continue to support President Trump. I use the term female vote. That's not really true. It's, of course, like any group, not a monolithic group. All right, finally, CBS This Morning co-host Norah O'Donnell spoke with former Vice President Joe Biden. Let's listen to some of their conversation.
The Mueller investigation, the special counsel into influence in the 2016 election. Do you believe that report should be issued before the midterms?
I think it'd be issued when they finish the investigation. I've been around a long time. You wait till the investigation is finished. You don't put an arbitrary end to it. You wait till it's finished, and let's see what it has to say.
And if Democrats win the House, do you believe that they may move forward with articles of impeachment?
I hope they don't. I don't think there's a basis for doing that right now. I think we should wait until the report comes out.
So, Ginger, we really haven't heard much regarding the Mueller probe on the campaign trail ahead of midterms. With just a few weeks left, do you think it will impact voters at all?
We know that the Justice Department has sort of unofficial rules that discourage releasing anything that may be seen as impacting an election in the weeks before that election. And that's likely why we've heard Mueller and his team go so quiet in the last few weeks. And to be frank, voters aren't asking or talking about this issue. It has great potential to affect the mood of the country, but it's not something that voters are showing up at town halls and asking about. They want to know about health care, the economy, how their kids are going to afford college. And for that reason, while it can influence the election should there be a new development in the last few weeks, it's unlikely to be something that voters are missing if it's not there.
All right, Ginger Gibson in Washington for us. Ginger, thanks so much.
Thank you.